wasteland, and the ghost named Harper. The wind screamed across the Wyoming basin like a thing, dying slowly. Its cries ricocheted off canyon walls, cut between burnt-out pine ribs, and scraped across the brittle bones of forgotten homesteads. It wasn't the kind of wind that asked permission. It took things warmth, memory, and sometimes even names. Dust twisted into crooked devils, rising like spirits unburied from the prairie's throat, spinning toward a horizon that had long since given up on welcoming. In the middle of all that, nowhere rode a man too stiff to shiver, too tired to curse the sky. His name was Harper Cain. At least that's what folks used to call him back when calling a man by his name still meant something. Now nobody asked where he came from. Not anymore. Anybody who might have known had either bled out under a sycamore or disappeared into the wind themselves. Harper's beard was frosted with the breath of long winters, his bones aching with a kind of hurt that didn't belong to age or weather. It was something deeper, older. He didn't talk much anymore. Not to people, not even to Bramble, the old gelding beneath him, who moved steady as memory hooves, placing themselves like they'd done it 100 times over. Bramble knew the trail better than Harper did. The horse didn't need direction, only permission, and Harper gave it in silence. His hands, gloved in cracked leather, lay slack on the reins the same way a man holds the world after it's already broken in his hands. 2 rifles hung across his saddle like ghosts. He couldn't bury one old Springfield 1 Henry repeater, both heavy not just with steel, but with the things they'd seen. Harper carried them the way you carry a burden. You never chose one that still insists on being yours. The season was changing too fast. Snow crusted the grasslands early that year, October biting like a rabid dog, and Harper didn't trust the sky anymore. He'd learned not to. It was the kind of sky that promised shelter and delivered storms. He was headed toward a trapper's hut nestled somewhere along Elk Spine Ridge. Maybe there'd be firewood stacked dry, maybe a bottle to drink the storm down, or maybe just 4 walls to sleep behind. But Harper knew the truth. The West didn't give men what they wanted. It gave them what was left, and what was left of Harper Cain wasn't much, but it moved, it breathed, and it still had hands steady enough to shoot. That counted for something, at least out here. Discovery in the snow, a woman half dead. The trail turned mean just past a dead pine split by lightning. Bramble snorted, slowed. That's when Harper saw her. A shape in the white curled still like something either dead or waiting for death to finish the job. At first he thought it might have been a carcass deer maybe, or coyote caught out in the freeze. But no. The shape had hair tangled and silvered with ice. A hand, blue and trembling, poked from beneath a torn dress. She wasn't from here. Harper could tell by the cut of her clothes, too fine once before the hem had been shredded by thorns and soaked by the thawing snow banks. She dragged herself through the wilderness, not walked. Harper reined Bramble in and squinted through the swirling flurries. The cold stung his eyes, but he made out enough. The woman hadn't moved, not even a twitch. Her skin was the color of porcelain left too long in the river. When her eyes opened, they weren't begging for help or full of fear. They were hollow, like someone who'd already walked through hell and found nothing worth screaming about. Harper's heart did something it hadn't done in years. It twitched, not from pity, from memory, from recognition. He dismounted, slow, careful. Not like she was a threat, but like he was stepping toward a wounded animal that might still bolt. His rifle stayed in one hand, not raised, not aimed, but present. The other reached for the saddlebag wool blanket flask. She flinched when he knelt beside her when the wool touched her shoulders. Her lips parted dry and cracked. "Don't touch me," she whispered, voice like wind on broken glass. Yet she didn't move away, didn't reach for a weapon. Maybe she couldn't. Maybe she didn't see the point, Ma'am Harper said, and it sounded like gravel in his throat. "You'll freeze." She didn't answer, just kept looking past him toward the white hills that swallowed the trail behind him like the mouth of some quiet god. Harper didn't ask more, just eased the blanket around her shoulders and sat there for a minute, the wind roaring like a scream neither of them wanted to let out. A shelter, a fire, and a silent pact. They didn't go far that night, just to a ruin he'd passed before a gamekeeper's shack half-eaten by weather roof, bowed but not fallen walls enough to keep the worst of the wind out. Harper didn't carry hope, but he did carry flint. A fire grew slow in the stone hearth, flickering shadows over the woman who hadn't said another word. She sat close to the flames, not for warmth, Harper thought, but for proof she was still alive. Her hands hovered near the heat, but never touched it. Her eyes stayed locked on the dancing embers, like they might whisper something she'd forgotten. Harper didn't ask for her name. She didn't ask for his. That kind of exchange would have felt too permanent, too binding, like naming a wound. He laid his rifle across his lap and watched the fire with her. The silence between them wasn't heavy yet. It was just wide, like the miles they'd both clearly walked. She didn't sleep that night. Neither did he. When the wind howled, she flinched not like someone cold, but like someone hunted. Harper moved slower than usual in the morning, not because he was sore, but because he was thinking about what it meant to find someone half dead and still full of something too fierce to name. He hitched Bramble, helped her onto the saddle without a word. She didn't thank him, just looked once at the horizon. "I'll take you to Sweetwater," he said, testing her silence. She jerked her head sharply like the idea was poison. No town, no sheriff. Her voice was stronger now. Steel under the frost. "Somebody after you?" he asked. She didn't answer. That was the beginning. A name like a stone. Eta. They didn't talk much over the next few days, just rode when the sun allowed and made camp when it dipped behind the hills, like it too had grown tired of this land. Harper didn't press her with questions. He knew silence when it was a shield, not a void. She rode behind him most days, wrapped in his old buffalo coat, the hem of her torn dress peeking beneath like a ghost trying to remember the shape of skin. She cleaned herself in river water, so cold it steamed off her shoulders, stitched the coat's ripped sleeve without being asked. She moved like someone used to surviving without permission. Then one morning, while they passed through a bend of birch near a frozen creek bed, she said her name. No warning, no fanfare, just dropped it, like a stone in a well. "Eta," she said. Harper turned slightly in the saddle, his brows drawn low. "That all? That's enough?" He nodded, because it was. No last name, no hometown, no father waiting, no one to bury. Eta, it fit her sharp, sudden, untraceable. They kept moving north deeper into land that forgot its own boundaries. Settlements thinned out behind them like threads coming loose from a coat. Harper didn't ask why she kept moving. He didn't need to. Some people weren't running from justice. They were running from vengeance, the kind that wore a man's face and spoke with a lawman's badge. Or worse, the kind that had no name at all, just hands and memory and power. And Ita she had the look of someone who knew how long vengeance could chase a person before it caught them by the hair and whispered lies about fate. Harper knew that look. He'd worn it once, so they didn't speak of origins or destinations, only of fires that needed tending, snares that needed checking. She never thanked him. He never asked her to. But the way she accepted his presence told him everything he needed to know. She'd chosen to stay for now. Ita's night screams and the first glimpse of the past. It was outside an abandoned rail shack that she screamed. A sound wrenched from her gut, cold and guttural, the kind that didn't belong in any living throat. Harper had been drowsing near the fire hat, tipped low over his brow when her cry cracked the night open like a fault line. He didn't move toward her, didn't call her name. He just threw a few sticks on the fire and waited. The scream didn't come again. When morning broke, she sat beside him as if nothing had happened, sleeves rolled down, lips pressed tight. No apologies, no explanation. She pointed to the rifle across his knees. "You ever kill a man with that?" Harper didn't blink, just stared into the orange of the flame. "Oh, yes." "Good." That was all she said. Weeks passed, and the frost on her cheeks gave way to something like color. Her gait straightened. She began to walk ahead, sometimes scouting trails without being asked. She could read the sky better than most trappers Harper had known could tell you when a storm was a day out or just bluffing. She mended her boots with sinew from a jackrabbit Harper had caught, humming under her breath without knowing. He caught her once, just a note or two, some old song with no name. She turned red as a girl caught swearing in church. He didn't tease her, just smiled. The thaw was slow, but it had begun, learning each other's scars in silence. Harper found himself watching her hands. They were quick, capable, and marked scarred in places like she'd lived her life between knives. There was a jagged old burn on her left wrist, high and sharp, like someone had grabbed her near a stovetop and held on too long. He never asked who. Ita never offered. That was the unspoken agreement between them. Your past was yours until you wanted it otherwise. One day they came upon a hawk half dead in the snow. Its wing was twisted backward, its body trembling. Ita didn't hesitate. She tore the scarf from her neck, made a sling, fed it bits of rabbit by hand. Harper watched in silence, feeling something strange stir in his chest. When the bird died 3 days later, she buried it beneath a spruce and whispered a prayer in a language Harper didn't recognize. He stood behind her arms, crossed brow low. "Thought you didn't believe in God." "I don't," she said softly. "But maybe he still believes in me." Harper didn't argue. How could he? Sometimes belief wasn't about theology. It was about surviving when you shouldn't have. He'd seen men cry to the heavens in war and never get an answer. Ita hadn't cried. She just buried the bird and walked on. That night, as they lay near the fire, Harper looked at her hands again, steady, knotted with quiet strength, and thought if there was any justice left in this world, maybe it had chosen to live inside her. The hawk, the prayer, and her atheism. The ground was beginning to thaw by the time the hawk's grave disappeared under meltwater. The snow had grown patchy in the woods, bearing the brown earth beneath like skin beneath torn cloth. But the cold hadn't left. It just settled lower, more patient like grief. Harper noticed Ita had begun humming more often, not songs exactly, but fragments of sound, the kind passed from mother to daughter when no one was listening. She caught herself doing it once while stirring a tin of beans and fell silent like a child scolded. Harper said nothing, just gave the fire a prod. The warmth between them was different now. Not comfort, not yet, but a kind of tolerable closeness, like old wolves who'd stopped snarling at each other's nearness. He'd caught her staring at the flames sometimes long after her hands had gone still. Her eyes weren't afraid anymore. Just tired. The sort of tired that comes from carrying something far too long. He'd known that kind of tired once after a war, after a hanging, after watching a woman in white vanish into his past like dust. One evening, after she'd stitched a hole in his coat without being asked, Harper passed her the flask. "You pray to that God often?" he asked, nodding toward the hawk's grave outside the ring of light. She took a swig, wiped her mouth with the back of her hand. "Only when I need him to see me." Harper tilted his head. "And does he don't know," she said. "But I talk anyway. Some habits keep you human." He let the fire crackle between them. "You talk to ghosts too?" "I don't have to," she whispered. "They're always there." There was no answer to that, only wind beyond the fire and the slow creak of trees remembering storms long past. First killer ghost from Nebraska. The first one came looking. Rode up out of the snow like a fever memory. A man with a butcher's beard and the stink of old law on his coat. Harper spotted him long before he reached the ruin where they'd taken shelter. The man wasn't looking for Harper. He was looking for her. Ita stood just outside the firelight, her breath coiling in the air. She didn't flinch when the hoofbeats came, didn't speak when the stranger dismounted. He recognized her before she said a word. "You," he said, voice full of disbelief, of rage unsaid. "Jesus Christ, you're alive." She didn't answer. "You don't know what you done, girl," he hissed. "You don't." He never finished. Harper stepped out, rifle raised. "I know that horse," he said. "Belonged to a marshal out of Casper. He's dead now." The man's eyes flicked, fingers twitched toward his shotgun. He didn't get the chance. Ita's pistol barked once. The shot took him just under the jaw. He toppled backward like a tree too long dead to stand. The snow fell quiet again. Harper turned to her. Her hands were steady, her eyes unreadable. Who was he? She looked away. "One of 5. They buried the man shallow, just enough to keep the wolves from dragging him to town. Took his cartridges, his flask, the tobacco pouch with the initials scratched off." Ita said nothing more. But something shifted. The silence between her and Harper had changed. It was no longer empty. It had shape, weight. That night she lay closer to the fire. Her bedroll brushed his. When the wind howled, she curled toward him, not with fear, not from cold, just so she wouldn't be alone. Cond killed the judge called Cray. They rode south through wind-choked valleys and prairie burned clean by frost. Ita didn't say the name, but Harper knew it weighed in her mouth. Judge Amos Cray. Not a real judge, just a man who liked the taste of power and wrapped it in scripture and scarlet. The kind of man who called girls property and made boys into tools. Trinidad smelled like rail smoke and rotted sugar. The saloons bled music into the alleyways, and women in rouge sang songs they didn't write. Cray owned one of them, the parlor. Velvet curtains, cheap whiskey, unanswered prayers. Harper rented a room above the general store with coins rubbed thin. He didn't sleep. Neither did she. The next night, Ita dressed in black. Veil, pistol strapped to her thigh. She vanished into the crowd like smoke. Harper watched from the roof across the alley, hands tight on the Henry rifle. She returned before dawn. "He's there," she said. Old, slower, still thinks I died in Nebraska. Harper didn't ask if she wanted help. She answered anyway. I want to do this myself. The next night she didn't wear the veil. Walked right through the front doors, up the stairs, past the men who reached for her. Harper waited 5 minutes before following. The music was wrong, the lights too bright, the air stank of perfume and sin. Then came the shot. 1, not 2. Harper ran. Cray sat in a walnut chair, face slack a hole just above the heart. Ita stood over him, pistol lowered. I made him look me in the eye, she said. Smoke still curled from the barrel. We need to go, Harper said. They slipped through the back, past a cook who saw the blood and kept chopping onions. Towns like that didn't ask questions. Justice, if it came, arrived late and blind. Third killed Brodry and the rock in her hand. They didn't speak for 2 days after Trinidad. The silence wasn't cold, just heavy, a reckoning. Ita rode with her head low, wind pulling strands of hair from under her coat hood. Harper didn't press her. He knew the weight of taking a life even when it was deserved, especially then. The third man had a name that twisted in the mouth, Leif Brodry. Ita had said it only once, her voice brittle. He was the first to touch me, she said. That was all. Harper hadn't asked for more, but her hand had shaken when she fed the fire that night. They tracked him into Utah through red canyons and dead sheep gullies, always 2 steps behind. Brodry had a way of slipping into wilderness like mold between the rocks. But Harper found the tracks a heel drag in the dirt, the right boot turned slightly out. Ita nodded. That's him. They followed him up switchbacks and through bone-dry gulches, their silence thick with unsaid prayers. On the 4th night, they found his camp. Brodry wasn't alone. 2 men sat near him, bounty types with iron eyes and twitchy hands. From above, Ita glassed them with Harper's long spyglass belly flat against red stone. Harper lay beside her. I take Brodry, she said, her voice so calm it felt like thunder behind quiet. You sure, he asked. I don't want anyone else finishing him. He nodded. At dawn, they moved. The fight broke open like a wolf's jaw. Harper dropped 1 bounty man with a clean shot to the chest. The second fired back, clipped Harper's arm. Blood bloomed down his sleeve like rust. Ita was already moving. Brodry tried to run. He didn't get far. They found him halfway down a ravine, boots skidding on sandstone, breath ragged. Ita tackled him, hands like fury. Harper reached the top just in time to see her raise a rock once, twice, and bring it down. She didn't stop until the cries ended. When she returned, her wrists were smeared with blood, her mouth silent, her eyes blown wide. Harper held her. She shook not from fear, but from memory ripping its way back through flesh. She cried finally into his coat. That night, the desert was still. The third was gone. 2 remained. 4th killed children and clean murder. They headed north next, following whispers into the high country of Montana. Gold country. Pines thick with secrets and skies that looked like God's hollow eye. Ita didn't speak the name until the town lay 2 days ahead. Fletcher Bain, she said. He used to wear blue. Cavalry. Held my face in 1 hand and a pistol in the other. Harper said nothing. Wasn't just me that got hurt, she added. Children, he asked, voice low. She didn't answer, but her silence carved the truth deeper than any words. They reached Helena and changed everything. Harper shaved the beard he'd worn since before the war. Ita wore a bonnet pulled low and spectacles with no glass. They became ghosts with names no one spoke. Bain ran a freight line now, iron-grain dynamite. His name was carved into church benches. He had a wife, 2 sons, a dog that barked at horses and followed the boys into the yard. He fell upward, she muttered. Men like him always do. For 3 nights they watched from the ridge. Harper caught her eyes lingering on the children, saw what burned there, grief twisted with guilt. "You sure?" he asked. "No one's innocent if they guard the guilty," she said. "And he don't deserve to die a grandfather. I say he needs to know why Harper told her." She shook her head. "He won't remember me. He'll see a maid, a shadow. That's what I was. That's how I'll take him." And she did. Slipped into the house during Sunday service, cut his throat while he sat in his chair, not recognizing the hands that steadied the blade. She came back with blood under her nails and tears she wiped away before they could fall. Harper didn't speak, just passed her his canteen. They rode out before the church bells rang. Only one name remained. Her father, the man who sold her. They camped outside Helena under stars that felt too bright to belong to such a cruel world. Harper stoked the fire muscles aching from days of cold saddle work. Ita sat across from him, staring into the flames like they owed her an answer. She broke the silence. "The last one's my father." Harper's head lifted. "He sold me," she said, not with rage, but a grief so old it had lost its teeth. "To keep his farm. Said I was too wild to wed proper." Harper didn't ask for details. He knew the kind of man she meant, the kind who called cowardice virtue and disguised shame as righteousness. Where, he asked. "Kansas?" "Dodge, last I heard. Calls himself a preacher now, writes sermons on forgiveness." Harper spat into the dust. Cowards always preach forgiveness after they've done the worst. Ita nodded. "I want him last, but I want you in the room. I want him to see who walks beside the daughter he buried." Harper's face didn't move, but something flickered in his eyes. "I've been with you," he said. "No," she whispered. "I mean in the room. That night they didn't sleep apart, and when the wind stirred the fire to ash, she said the thing she'd never dared before. I dreamed you left." "I won't," he said. "You could." "I won't." She believed him. That was new. The final confrontation. The girl who climbed out Kansas welcomed them with heat and guilt, green fields thick with secrets and churches, whitewashed to hide the blood between the pews. Ita didn't wear black anymore. She wore a name, a spell, something old and sharp. "Mara Jane," she said one morning. "That's what my mother called me, before she died." Harper didn't use it, not out loud, but he held it like a blade inside his chest, an edge meant for someone who had long escaped justice. They found the preacher in a wooden church at the edge of the prairie, haloed by gold cornfields and a lie called grace. He was gray now, shoulders hunched beneath holy cloth, but his voice still rang strong, smooth as river stone, dry as guilt. He preached forgiveness, eyes glistening with well-practiced humility. After service, Harper and Ita stood outside the chapel, backs to the wind. "Do you believe in hell?" she asked. "I used to," Harper replied. "Now I think some folks carry it with them." She nodded slowly. "I'm done carrying." That night, the hymn still echoing behind stained glass, she walked into his home. The door creaked like it remembered her. The man was writing a sermon, hands shaking when he looked up. She placed the pistol on the table between them. "Do you know me?" He stared. Then the recognition came slow and horrible. "I buried you." "No," she said. "You tried to, but I climbed out." He wept. She didn't. She didn't kill him quickly. Not cruel, but not clean. She made him understand word by word what his shame had cost her. Every year, every man, every night, she bled under someone else's weight because he was too weak to face his own reflection. Harper waited outside. When she returned, her eyes were dry. She sat beside him on the church steps, dawn barely breaking the sky. "I feel lighter," she said. "Then it's done." Decision to stay, to build, to love. They didn't run this time. They rode slow into the sunrise, past the bones of old towns and the ghosts that had chased them for so long. Harper looked over at her and saw something new in her face. Not triumph, not sorrow. Something trembling and raw. Hope. They crossed into Dakota by early summer. The land softened in shape, but not in truth. Prairie bled into badlands, and the sky towered overhead like judgment waiting to fall. Towns grew farther apart. The wind sang different here, higher, hollower, like something ancient listening beneath the earth. Harper thought often of laying down his rifle. Ita too had changed. He saw it in her hands. She still wore her pistol, always would, but she no longer checked it each morning like a widow checking for a pulse. She didn't flinch from violence, but she didn't reach for it either. That was new. They took work where it came. Fencing land, guarding rail, tracking rustlers. Harper noticed her gait grow looser, her voice softer on the edges. The woman who once trembled at touch now offered him a worn leather flask without hesitation. Sometimes she smiled. It hurt her to do it, but she did. One evening near Mandan, they sat outside a river-stained shack, Harper reading from a book he'd traded for a broken-spined copy of The Tempest. Etta stitched a saddlebag by lantern light, her fingers quick and steady. He read aloud, voice slow. "The rarer action is in virtue than in vengeance." Ita didn't look up. "He never lived through what I did." Harper smiled faintly. "No," he said, "but maybe he wanted to." Trouble at Knife Hollow. Wanted dead or alive trouble found them again in Knife Hollow, a dried-out mining camp where mean men grew like mold in whiskey. Harper had signed on to escort a freight convoy east. Ita had a feeling in her gut. "Something's wrong," she whispered that night. "I can feel it in my teeth." She was right. A bounty poster had gone up in the town post office, tacked under cracked glass. No sketch, just a name, Ita Rowan. Alive. 10,000 coin. Issued from Cheyenne. Harper stared at it, silent. "You sure you didn't leave one alive?" he asked. "There's always someone left alive," she replied. "But I never figured they'd be rich enough to keep hunting me." She tore the paper down and burned it. But fire didn't erase what had been written. Not out here. 2 nights later, Harper woke to the sound of boots in frost. Quiet, deliberate. 3 men, maybe 4. Ita was already awake, pistol in hand, eyes sharp. "They're here," she said. "Not bounty men. Something colder." Outside, shadows circled the shack like wolves. They didn't shout, didn't taunt, just waited. Harper laid traps, bellstone string. Ita moved through the dark like smoke. "They know me," she whispered. "Not just how I move, how I think." At dawn they split. Harper drew them south through a canyon, blood in his sleeve, grit in his lungs. One caught him from above, knife raised. He missed his shot. Then a single report cracked the air. Ita stood 10 feet away, gun still smoking. "You all right?" she asked. Better than him. But Harper saw her hands tremble afterward, not from fear, but from memory. "They won't stop," she said. "Then we won't either." The Ghost Ridge cabin building, something that lasts. The mountains took them in the way an old friend might, gruff-weathered but willing to offer a place to rest your bones. They crossed into old Lakota land, where the air was thinner and the wind didn't carry the scent of blood. The government called the territory empty. Ita called it sacred. "We'll be ghosts here," she said, standing on a ridge overlooking a valley folded in pine and stone. "Too wild for law, too hard for comfort." "Sounds like home," Harper said. "No," she replied, a rare softness in her voice. "This time it'll be different." They built a cabin with their hands, timber scavenged from rail wrecks, a roof of sod layered over tar. The work was slow, Harper's arm still healing from the ambush near Knife Hollow but steady. Ita stitched his shoulder back together herself, teased him that he owed her another life. He told her she'd already given it. By the time August arrived, the place stood firm, a one-room stronghold with a smoke pipe and a pantry carved into the wall. They planted things: squash, beans, hope. They made trade runs to small camps where names didn't matter, where no one asked about the past. And slowly, they healed. Ita laughed more often now, not the kind of laugh used to keep people away, but something real, rough, startled, beautiful. Harper never said what it meant to him. He just listened and memorized the sound like scripture. Still, Harper kept watch each dusk, sat on the porch with his rifle across his knees. Peace, he knew, wasn't something you stumbled into. It had to be defended and sometimes earned. The confession in the creek. Love spoken without fear. One morning, the creek whispered more than usual. The air had cooled, the trees had turned the yellow of old paper, and the sky stretched quiet and clean above them. Harper stepped outside with a tin mug in his hand and saw her. Ita stood in the middle of the stream, barefoot, water to her knees. Her hair, so often tied tight, hung loose, brushing her waist like a curtain of shadow. She was still, staring up at the sky like it was telling her something only she could hear. He didn't want to speak, didn't want to shatter whatever truth she was gathering from the silence. But the words rose anyway, sudden as breath. "I love you," Harper said. Ita didn't turn, didn't blink, just stood there, arms, slack breath fogging in the chill. Then finally, "I know." He didn't need more than that. It wasn't the end of their story. It wasn't even a promise. It was something deeper, an anchor in the storm they'd both lived through. In a world where nothing lasted, where names could be erased and women sold like property, she had chosen to stay, to build, to believe. And Harper, scarred, tired, full of ghosts, had chosen her. They didn't speak of marriage. They didn't need rings or paper. They had firewood stacked and scars mended. They had nights where no screams came. They had silence that didn't hurt. The return of blood mercenaries in the snow. But the past, like winter, always found a way back. By September, snow crept early down the ridges. The trees folded in on themselves, and the wind carried a sharpness that wasn't just weather, it was omen. Harper found tracks one morning, shallow, deliberate, boots too clean for trappers. He didn't tell her. Just oiled the rifles and watched the trees. Ita knew anyway. That night she laid her pistol on the table and stared at it long. "I'm tired of killing," she said. He nodded. "Me too. But I'll do it again," she added, "if I have to." "I know." They came at dusk, 4 men, 1 woman, silent through the snow like wolves who spoke in coin, not justice, mercenaries. Hired by someone too afraid to come themselves. Ita didn't run. She stepped outside, barefoot arms, crossed hair loose like a banner of defiance. "I'm Ita Rowan," she said. "You came to kill me." The leader stepped forward, a man with bark for skin and death in his eyes. "You've cost powerful men," he said. "You knew this day would come." "I did." Harper stepped from the shadows behind her rifle raised. "If you want her, you'll have to take me too." "No," the leader said. "You both die." A beat passed, then Harper fired. The first man fell before his words had time to vanish. Chaos broke. Snow erupted under gunfire. Bullets screamed past wood. Ida moved like a storm pistol, barking in rhythm. One man fell, then another. Harper took a bullet to the thigh. Dropped, gritted his teeth. Ida dragged him behind the porch rail. The fight didn't last long. 3 minutes of hell. Then silence. Smoke rose from blood-soaked snow. The leader crawled shoulder torn open. "No mercy," he rasped. Ida stood over him, breathing hard. She looked to Harper, then down at the man. "No," she said, and fired her last bullet. The price of peace: fire, ash, and a future desired. After the shooting stopped, snow began to fall again, slow, soft, as if the world wanted to bury what had happened before anyone else could remember it. Harper lay against the porch wall, blood soaking through the thigh of his trousers. The pain throbbed like a drumbeat in his bones, but he stayed quiet, jaw clenched. He didn't want her to worry more than she already did. Ida's hands trembled as she wrapped the wound with rags, pressing harder than necessary to stop the bleeding. Her breath came fast, too fast. "You're not dying," she said, voice firm, brittle. Harper gave a tired grin. "Didn't say I was." But when she leaned her forehead against his chest, he felt the weight behind her silence. She wasn't afraid of death. She was afraid of losing what they'd fought to build, what they'd barely begun to believe in. "I can't lose you," she whispered. "You won't." "Promise me." "I do." That night, they didn't speak of the dead. They dragged the bodies into a heap behind the cabin, built a fire tall enough to touch the pine boughs above. No prayers, no words, just flame and the crackling sound of vengeance burning itself to ash. By morning, the valley was quiet again. Smoke coiled into the sky like a last exhale. Ida sat on the porch steps, arms around her knees, staring into the distance. "They'll come again," she said. "Maybe they'll never stop." Harper crouched beside her legs, stiff but healing. "Then we won't either." But she shook her head. "I want more than just running. Building beyond revenge. The shape of peace." The land around them didn't change, but they did. Slowly, day by day, Harper stacked more firewood than he ever had before. Ida gathered herbs she'd learned to recognize by scent, not name. She planted onions. He patched the roof. There was no blueprint to peace, but they tried anyway. Not because they thought it would last, but because they needed to know they were capable of it. Ida said it one night, sitting by the hearth, hands wrapped around a tin cup. "I never wanted peace. I wanted revenge. You got it. Now I want peace. I just don't know how to live in it." "You'll learn," Harper said. She looked at him. Really looked. "We'll learn." And they did. Seasons shifted. The snow melted into soft ground. Wheat sprouted where once only frost had ruled. They raised goats, named them, ate some, mourned one. Ida started to laugh more often, even if it still hurt to do it. Harper too softened. He read aloud in the evenings. Mended leather, cooked breakfast, sometimes badly. No bounty men came, or if they did, they never made it out. They buried Bramble Harper's old gelding beneath the oak tree on the edge of the field, marked the grave with a stone and nothing else. Ida wept quietly when they laid him down. Harper didn't speak, just held her until her shoulders stopped shaking. They no longer lived like fugitives. They lived like people who had decided to stay, not out of fear or exhaustion, but out of choice. That Harper knew was the real kind of freedom. A song, a kiss, and the wholeness of surviving one. Crisp autumn morning, the smell of cornmeal filled the cabin. The light through the window was golden, spilling across the wooden floor like spilled whiskey. Ita stood by the table, grinding corn with slow, practiced hands, and she was humming. It took Harper a moment to realize what he was hearing, not because she couldn't carry a tune she could, but because it had been so long since he'd heard music that didn't come from pain. He leaned in the doorway, arms crossed, a rare smile tugging his mouth. "You're singing," he said. Ita froze, startled. Then a sound escaped her lips, half a laugh, half an apology. "I guess I am." He crossed the room, slowly reached for her hand, pulled her close. She let herself be held cheek against his chest. They stood like that for a while, no rush, no destination. Just the sound of breathing and the world waiting outside their door. Then he kissed her. Slow, sure. Not as a question, but as a truth. As something they'd both earned, not from fate, but from surviving long enough to find each other. In that moment, Harper knew something he hadn't dared believe, since before the war the world wasn't just full of pain. It could also hold grace. And Ita, she didn't flinch, didn't pull away. She kissed him back, steady as the sunrise. They had buried the past, burned it, named it, and still they had survived. Not perfectly, not without cost. The final echoes tracks in the snow, and what doesn't die peace, as Harper had always suspected, was not a promise. It was a pause, fragile, fleeting, and hard-earned. By the second winter in the ridge cabin, it seemed they had built something close to stillness. Ita no longer woke with a blade in her hand. Harper's cane became more tool than weapon. Their goats fattened. The pantry held through December. The valley wrapped them like a secret it had chosen to keep. But peace has a way of drawing attention. So does legend. One morning, Harper spotted fresh tracks in the snow just beyond the tree line. Clean boots, light step. Not a trapper's gait too careful. He crouched over the prints for a long time, fingers brushing the disturbed powder. Whoever had made them wasn't trying to hide. They were scouting, watching. He said nothing to Ita that day, but he oiled the rifles that night with slow, steady hands and double-checked every latch on the cabin. Of course, Ita knew. She always did. That night she sat at the table staring at her pistol like it was a stranger she hadn't spoken to in years. "I'm tired of killing," she said softly. Harper didn't speak. "But I'll do it again," she added, "if I have to." He nodded. "I know." It wasn't defeat in her voice. It was clarity. Whatever they had built, it would never be entirely free of shadows, not with her name still whispered in bounty halls, not with the scars on her body or the memories behind her eyes, and not with Harper's past still stitched into his bones. The mercenaries, a reckoning in the snow. They came at dusk, when the snow dulled sound, and breath fogged slow in the throat. 4 men, 1 woman. No badges, no questions, just weapons and purpose. Mercenaries. Harper saw them, first shapes moving like wolves through the pine. Their rifles weren't slung loose like bounty hunters. They were ready. Professional. Cold. Ita stepped outside before he could stop her barefoot in the snow hair-braided back eyes, calm as a storm coming in off the ridge. "I'm Ita Rowan," she said. "You came to kill me." The leader was tall, shoulders like barn timber, jaw set like rock. "You've cost powerful men," he said. "You knew this day would come." "I did." Behind her, Harper stepped into the open rifle, raised heart pounding against his ribs. "If you want her, you'll have to take me too." The mercenary's eyes shifted, calculating. "No," he said flatly. "You both die." And then Harper fired. The shot struck center mass. The man dropped like a felled ox. Chaos erupted. Bullets split the air. Snow leapt. Harper felt one catch his thigh again, hot and tearing. Ita dragged him behind the porch. Her pistol sang 2 shots, both clean. Harper gritted his teeth, kept firing. 3 minutes. That's all it took. 3 minutes of hell, smoke and screaming. Then silence. The last mercenary, the woman crawled through, blood arm hanging loose. "No mercy," she hissed. Ita stood over her, looked back at Harper. "No," she said, and ended it. When it was over, Harper leaned against the porch wall, blood soaking the snow beneath him. Ita pressed her forehead to his chest, her breath shaking. "I can't lose you. You won't. A life worth defending, the beginning of something whole." They burned the bodies in the morning. There were no words, no prayers, just fire and smoke rising into a sky that refused to weep. Afterward, Ita sat on the steps, arms wrapped around her knees. "They'll come again," she said. "Maybe they'll never stop." "Then we won't either," Harper replied, sitting beside her, leg aching but heart steady. She turned to him slowly. "But I want more than just running." Harper nodded. "Then we build it. Right here. Day by day." Ita stared out at the valley. "I never wanted peace," she said. "I wanted revenge." "You got it. Now I want peace. I just don't know how to live in it." "We'll learn," he said. She took his hand. They sat there for a long while, not as fugitives or killers, but as 2 people who had survived the worst the world could throw at them. And more than that, they had chosen each other through it all, against the odds, against the ghosts. Years would pass. They would mend fences, raise crops, laugh over burnt stew. Ita would hum again, maybe even sing. Harper would read aloud under lamplight. They would bury goats, plant trees, raise a child who never had to learn the names of their enemies. And sometimes, when the wind howled just right, Harper would catch her staring out toward the hills. "What are you thinking?" he'd ask. "That I climbed out," she'd say, "and I'm never going back." And he'd believe her, because the fire hadn't burned them alive. It had made them real. Epilogue. What survives the fire? Time didn't move fast in the ridge country. It shifted like wind through pine, slow, steady, and full of old songs. The world outside kept turning, full of new wars, new names, new men who thought they were gods in dusty coats. But up in the cabin, hidden in the folds of the land, Ita and Harper moved at their own pace. The scars faded, but never disappeared. Ita no longer woke to nightmares, not every night. Sometimes, just a silence too loud to bear, and Harper would reach across the dark, find her hand, and say nothing. That was always enough. Harper's limp never healed fully. He leaned heavier on his cane as the winters stacked like pages in a book they never finished reading. But he kept walking one slow step at a time until the fences stood, the grain dried, and the valley bloomed with something neither of them had a word for. It wasn't happiness, not exactly. It was steadiness. It was earned. They planted an apple tree for Bramble. It grew twisted and stubborn, roots dug deep into the earth like the old gelding's hooves had once done. Each spring it bloomed small white flowers. Ita said the blossoms smelled like memory. She sang more often now, softly to herself, to the goats, to the creek. Sometimes when she thought Harper wasn't listening, she'd sing the names of the dead not with pain but with honor. 5 names, then 4, then 3, until none of them needed to be spoken anymore. No more bounty men came, or maybe they did. But the ridge didn't give up secrets, and the snow buried things quickly in that part of the world. One winter, when the wind howled like it had the night Harper first saw her in the snow, Ita stood by the hearth, her face lit in firelight. She turned to him, older now, but just as fierce. "If they ever come again," she said, "I won't hide." Harper smiled. "You never did." "I'll kill again if I have to," she said. "But I'd rather die planting seeds." He looked at her. "Then let's make sure they grow." They built a second room on the cabin, started teaching the neighbor's boy how to shoot straight and ride quiet, let a widow from Knife Hollow trade chickens for cider. Sometimes they sat by the fire and read lines from books neither of them understood completely, but they liked the sound of the words. In the end, they didn't live forever. No one does. But they died free, and that mattered more. When Harper passed, it was beside the creek cane in one hand, a book in the other. Ita buried him beneath the apple tree, said a prayer she didn't believe in, just in case God still remembered her voice. She sat beside him often after that, told him stories, laughed, and when her time came years later, she went soft and unafraid. No guns, no shadows, just windpine and the quiet hum of a woman who had outlived the worst of men and built something worth leaving behind.